We are back, everybody, and this is going to be a little bit of a special build for me. This wood came from my grandpa's garage and he has since passed, so we're going to turn this walnut into some beautiful cutting boards, and we're really going to take them to the next level and try our hand at some advanced inlays. I think you're going to like this one. Stick around and let's get this thing started. And since these are just going to be cutting boards, we don't need this piece whole, so we're just going to break it down into smaller chunks to make it a little bit more manageable. And when you're processing this, remove all the checks or cracks right away. It's one less thing to worry about, and you don't want any of this to show up in your board, as it'll just lead to problems further down the road. Now we're going to process this like any other piece of wood. Just going to peel back them layers and get a nice square piece of lumber. Now that we have one clean edge, let's head over to the table saw and cut off all this bark and bird poop. And we have an 8-inch joiner, so that's right about where I cut them. And now that we have 3 clean edges, let's send this thing through the planer and get it nice and square. We've been using this Laguna PX20 for quite a while now, and it's been great. Even this digital readout, I honestly didn't think I'd use it much, but I reference it every time I turn it on. And I'm coming from a 13-inch planer to this 20-inch monster, and it is a completely different experience. Between the ShearTech helical head and the 5 horsepower motor, this thing is an absolute powerhouse. I'm super happy with our purchase, and if you're in the market for a planer, I would definitely recommend at least taking a look at this one. They also make a 16-inch version as well. And the thing that blew my mind the most was this thing is actually quieter than our last planer that was literally half the size. And now that these are processed most of the way, we're going to let these acclimate for 3 to 4 days, as this is air-dried wood, so I'm going to let them rest before I move on to the next steps. Back to the table saw. We're going to cut off as much sapwood and or cracks as we can, just as one less thing to worry about. And I want to keep as much white out of the board as I can. And these are still over 2 inches thick, so we're just going to take them down a little further, trying to remove a little bit more of that sap and just get them to their final dimension. And we're going to break these down even further. We're going to cut these to about 19 inches, which will yield about a 17-inch board. And then I'm going to cut these into as even strips as possible without wasting material, and we are making 2 boards here, so there will be a lot of pieces. I'm just using math to figure this all out, but they do have calculators online if you're struggling to figure out how many pieces you need to get a certain size board. Now I'm just going to spread them out evenly between the clamps and finding which pieces kind of look best and what orientation I like the most. Shooting for 13 inches, so make sure the width of your board is correct at this point, because this will dictate how wide your board will be. Then we're just going to glue these up and let them dry overnight before we move on to the next steps. And I had the luxury of a drum sander, so it makes these end grain cutting boards way easier. If not, you'll just have to send this through the planer or just sand everything as smooth as you can. And then at the time, my employee was using the table saw, so I'm just going to use the bandsaw. It does yield less waste than the table saw as the blade is thinner, but you end up with the same result either way. And we're aiming for an 1.5 inch thick cutting board, so we're going to cut it to about 1 5/8 inches, or just over. And you're going to get tear out no matter what method you use, so you need to get rid of all the fuzzies and flyers to get a nice clean glue up. Luckily for me, I'm going to run it through the drum sander again just to do all this in a lot faster manner. And then I'm just going to do about 3 quick light passes just to clean up that tear out and make everything nice and consistent. And now that we have a bunch of nice even pieces, we're going to just check the lineup to make sure there's no gaps or any inconsistencies in there, so we get a nice clean glue up. And we're just going to glue everything together the same as before, and we'll have our 2 cutting boards. And if you've made an end grain cutting board before, you know that sanding end grain is awful, so drum sander to the rescue. You could also flatten these with a router sled or a CNC. That would also be a quick and easy method as well. And now I'm going to do that same exact method a bunch of times to generate all the plugs for the inlays, and I'm just going to use multiple wood types to get different contrasting colors. The boards are black walnut. We will use black limba, akume, mahogany, and hard maple. Oh, and a little bit of bloodwood. A bunch of sanding and several glue ups later, we have all of our plugs. There's a lot of people out there that think the CNC inlays are easy, but just to this point I already have a bunch of time in these boards. And since we're making essentially 2 of the same cutting board, we'll make them to the exact same size and make them nice and square with this crosscut sled. And now on to what people think is the easy part, the CNC. So I just made this makeshift fence, which will kind of bite me in the butt a little bit here. And I'm not going to go super in-depth with the CNC stuff, but if you guys are interested, I can definitely do more in-depth videos on that end of it. This is more so a trial run to see how you guys respond to this type of video. And then I'm using the same 2 bits through this entire process, an 1/8 inch upcut and a tapered ball nose. I will have links to these in the description so you guys can check them out yourself. And just to give you an idea, there's about almost 30 tool paths to make these happen, and each board took about 3.5–4 hours. Cutting board itself will be on the CNC 3 times, not including any of the plug clearing, but now we're just going to move on to cutting some of the plugs and then insetting those into the board. And this is my second attempt at an advanced inlay. I did have some small errors throughout the piece, mostly in programming. This moon plug, for instance, was one of them. My parameters weren't set correctly, and there was some tiny gaps around the names in the plug. And then for clearing, I used a 1/4 inch upcut. My bandsaw wasn't big enough to cut these off, so I just used the CNC. I've been getting asked a ton of questions about these on Instagram, and there's just no easy way to explain it. There's just so much that goes into them, and there's no magic numbers that just work for every preset and bit. I'm still learning myself and just trying different bits out. I already got a lot of time invested in just learning how to do these, so it's not just something that you're just going to learn overnight. It takes a lot of practice. Then we're pretty much just going to rinse and repeat all this, glue the plug, pound the plug in, cut the plug off. And yet another mistake. I didn't center my piece in the design, so when I centered it on the board, it was actually off center from the computer, so I just wasted an hour of carve time. So we're gonna have to cut new wolf outlines, but I will be able to salvage some pieces from this plug. And I also had to clamp it and glue it a little different than planned since I had that error, but it's alright, it'll work out in the end. And these do get clamped and pressed into the groove. I don't just pound them in and leave them. It's just not that exciting, so I didn't show it. And just over an hour of carve time later, we are back on track with the new wolf outlines. And another factor that's quite difficult is getting the alignment perfect every single time, as these boards have to come on here for a female engraving 3 times. And I removed the plug the next day, and as you can see, the glue inside there is still kind of wet. It just doesn't breathe, and because it's kind of just trapped in there underneath the plug. And right here's where my alignment got messed up. I don't know if it got bumped or if it just shifted while I was cutting, but this kind of led to a couple problems down the road. And I already have plans for a different fence type after this mistake. I'll point out two mistakes here. This one, the boards were the same, so I thought I would use the same 0, but that wasn't the case. And then here, as you can see, my board got kind of tilted or shifted a little bit, so it kind of threw off the whole design. It's more noticeable in one board than the other, so let me know if you can tell in the end. I am single passing all these. The inlay in the board is about 1/4 inch, and then these are about 0.3. And then some people don't like music in videos and just like the shop sounds, but there's always machines running in my shop. The CNC or the dust collector are always howling, so it just doesn't sound that great. And this is one of the most satisfying parts, seeing all the pieces that are in there and kind of looking for errors, but it's really hard to tell until you get the whole thing sanded off. I also like to add handles to my boards, so I'll add a couple links down below for bits I use to achieve this. It just makes them easier to handle and gives them a nice look. And end grain boards require a ton of sanding, so you really want to take extra care, especially with these inlay boards, all the different wood types. You can end up getting low spots if you're not careful. I ended up sanding these to 320. And unfortunately, I double clicked the record button, so I didn't get the oiling process of these. I did get it in the vertical format, so if you're interested, go check that out on Facebook or Instagram or any of those mediums, and I will have that posted there. And this is definitely the most satisfying part, seeing all them colors come to life when you add that oil. We use walrus oil, but a lot of people just use mineral oil, whatever works best for you. And now for the finishing touches, we're going to wax these babies up to give them a nice sheen and an extra coat of protection, and then add the rubber feet. And that's a wrap, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. For my second advanced inlay boards ever, I think these turned out pretty good. I went with a Native American theme, as I have Native American culture on that side of the family. And then one is just a last name, and the other is the Native American Oneida language for wolf or community. These boards will be going to my mother and uncle, and there was enough for one more board, so I will make myself one eventually. Let me know what you guys think. If you want more videos like this, we'll gladly share more on the process. If you guys want to learn inlays alongside me, I will try to make that happen. So just let me know what you think. We can either do more or less of these videos. I just thought it was a cool project I wanted to take on. So I hope you guys all have a good day. And also a huge shout out to Nick over at Brownwood. Go check out his channel. He's kind of the reason I got into all this. He was an inspiration, and I've been studying his videos for a while. So if you want to see a true master at work, go check out Brownwood's YouTube channel.